Thank this incredible pianist. She's shy, but please thank her. I asked her at the very last minute, and she said yes. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay, welcome to everybody. Please come and get seated. If you will, there are people out in the hallway. They need to come on in. And everybody move up front, if you would. It's going to be a small but intimate group here. So, and thank you all for coming. Okay, and I'm Sue Craig, and I want to make a few announcements before we get started too much. Come on, you guys at the table, we need you. Okay, first of all, we have a very special person here who helped to start with her dear honey, 350.org, and today is her birthday. And so we are going to sing happy birthday to Patty. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday, dear Patty. Happy birthday to you. Okay, and just a few more announcements. First of all, the bathrooms are on this side of the hallway if you need them, okay? And there are all shapes and sizes all the way down the hall, so. Okay, I also want you, Chris LeBlanc, Chris, I want you to thank this gentleman. He comes in here and does an incredible job with our AV with no recompense. He just does it to help us out here at church. It's just wonderful. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Okay. I've also been asked to make a disclaimer because this bill, HB 2020, some of the groups here are not totally on board with what's in the bill, but they are really on board on getting it passed. So those are two very different things, okay? All right, and we are hoping to get this on YouTube so that the folks who didn't get to come this evening will be able to watch it, and I'll have to give you that YouTube, whatever, is it Eugene? Eugene. It's very simple. You go to YouTube and then hit Eugene, and then if you scroll around, you will find tonight's program later. Okay. We have some wonderful people with us that help sponsor this whole thing. Are you going to talk about that? No? Okay. All right. League of Women Voters helped us. 350. Yes. Wait till I'm finished. Wait till I'm finished. Okay. League of Women Voters, 350.org, Oregon Wild, Sierra Club, the Many Rivers Sierra Club. Who is the fifth one? Interfaith Earth Keepers, who were the first ones to support us and get on board. So thank you to all those groups. We also have Citizens Climate Lobby here as tabling, and Friends of the Douglas Fir Monument. So check all those tables out when you can, okay? And at the end, we have a goodwill offering on the very back table on our little table back there. So if you would like to help us keep things like this going in our church, that would be very much appreciated. And now, Sarah Scotchko, would you please come? All right. I'm just going to say you're our minister. Yes, thank you.
Good evening. I'm intern minister Sarah Scotchko, and it is my privilege and honor to welcome you all to the Unitarian Universalist Church in Eugene. First of all, thank you so much to Sue Craig for her tireless activism, for her gift at bringing together people and groups, at forging those connections that wind up being the web that ties these movements together. Without each other, we are nothing. I stand before you to say that as a Unitarian Universalist, I hold a respect for the interdependent web of existence and life as one of my core principles, one of the core principles of this church. We have, as a religious movement, dedicated ourselves to the ongoing care of our environment, not just as a moral issue, but truly as a religious imperative. And so I welcome you with blessings upon your work to create a new world, not of wealth, but of well-being, not of stock values, but of hands and hearts and lives united in care for each other and this world. Now, that world that we envision doesn't begin in the Supreme Court, though we'd like to see it get there. It begins in church social halls, in community rec centers, in the back room at the library. And often it can feel like we're just talking in circles amongst ourselves. Make no mistake of the importance of the work that you do in those spaces. Not every venue is the Supreme Court, but the work that winds up at the Supreme Court has its roots here. And so I am honored to welcome you here. Justice, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King reminds us, justice is nothing less than love in public. Justice is what love looks like in public. And so let it be nothing less than love that underpins your work for our shared world, for each other, and the creatures we share this planet with. Amen. Amen.
Our first speaker has been working on this issue of HB 2020 for about 7 years. That's how long it's been taking the legislature thinking about this. And he says in terms of his background, he was in local governmental agencies managing and implementing telecommunication systems, and not exactly climate related, he says, but he can take advantage of looking from the topic from the outside, which he has done a remarkable job doing. So, Dan Mulholland, thank you.
Let's see if we can make this go. Wake up. All right. So here we are. You're always supposed to start a presentation with something funny, right? And I told Charlie he had to laugh at this because no one ever gets it. But I made the words bigger so you could see this is about, New York, this is about, so anyway. Thank you. Anyway, so what I'm going to cover is this House bill. We're not going to talk about the need to do something or anything like that because I think we all have been through that. There's some lingo to learn. We're going to cover Oregon's emissions compared to other people's emissions, a little bit of legislative history, and some challenges with the bill in terms of what it does and doesn't do. So first, you have to sort your emissions into two buckets. And so these are biogenic emissions. And so we know what that pile is. And the other one is a word that I can't pronounce, anthropogenic, yes, thank you. And so, which is about tailpipes, mostly burning fossil fuels. And this looks like a very clear distinction, but it really isn't as we get into it. So math. So here's some math. I always want to know, how in the heck do they measure this stuff? So if you go out and you have a gallon of gas and it weighs 6 pounds, but when you burn it, it gets to be 3 times bigger because, of course, it combines things together. It's that carbon cycle and all that stuff. So the bottom line is we're going to be measuring things in metric tons. And a metric ton is roughly what you get when you burn 100 gallons of diesel or 112 gallons of gasoline. And so they're pushing us into the metric system, whether we want to or not, whatever. So this measure has been long in development, builds on prior laws, and all that stuff. And it's a cap and trade plan. And cap and trade is one of those things, those economist theories, where you're going to give people an incentive to do the right thing and a disincentive to do the wrong thing. That you're going to take the money from people who have it and give it to people who can use it to lower emissions, and it'll all be wonderful when we're done. But you'll see that it's just like all economists' theories. It's hard to implement exactly in the world we live in. So a cap and trade, the most important thing is it sets a cap on how much pollution there is, and it decreases each year, and it gives people the right to pollute. It's like a game of musical chairs with pollution, and you remove a chair each year, and allows people to buy the right to pollute. And these are called allowances, just like you gave to your kids. An allowance is the right to emit 1 ton of carbon dioxide or its equivalent of other kinds of pollution. So now let's take a look at Oregon's share of this problem. This is a little bit old, but it's good enough. So what this shows, that blue line up there is what the history of this is. The red line shows the policy line that we're on here. That it takes into account all the laws we've passed so far. The yellow line is the line that we're supposed to be on if we're going to meet the goals that were laid out a few years ago by the legislature. So you can see there's a problem. Here's another version of the same one. It's a little bit fancier, but you see in the here the gap between things. So the goal of the law, as it says here, it's proposed, is they've made it fairly aggressive in terms of trying to front load the emissions reductions as much as possible. So 20% by 2025, 45% by 2035, 80% by 2050, below 1990 levels in theory. So now we're in this pie chart, again, a little bit out of date, but it's still roughly right. That's where the pollution comes from. Transportation's the big one at nearly 40%. Electricity generation, that means where we're burning oil and mostly coal or natural gas to make electricity. Burning natural gas, about 10%, agriculture 9%, industrial 6%, and then miscellaneous other is 6%. So what we want to do now is to go through and talk about how each type of pollution is covered under this law, and who gets the free rides and that sort of thing. So this chart shows the middle column is the million metric tons of pollution that each sector has, and then the far right is a list of exemptions. So you can see in transportation that we're going to let the aviation industry off the hook, and marine fuels are off the hook, and that's 3 million metric tons a year. And in the industrial space, we're letting off the hook Lane County's, Short Mountain, where they burn methane to create electricity. That's actually a good thing. And we're also exempting industrial people who pollute less than 25,000 tons a year. Agriculture's exempt, and so on. So you can see at the very bottom, so the bill covers about 82% of Oregon's emissions, and it means that we're trying to reduce emissions based upon this 51 million metric tons of annual emissions. Anyway, the bill has all kinds of complicated stuff in it that it allows for averaging over years and other such things, and it's generally speaking a much better bill than it was a few years ago in terms of its thoughtfulness and clarity. Industry. This is an impossible to see slide, but this list of things, including pulp mills and cement manufacturers and iron and steel mills, and basically this list covers every large industrial company in Oregon. The way this is handled in the bill is that the first year, all these companies get free allowances for all their emissions. These decline about 5% a year. There was a whole lot of work done in the last year to make this more sophisticated, and things like for if a plant makes 100 widgets a year and it goes up to 110 or it drops down to 90, how you handle that sort of thing. So one of the big political issues right now is who gets free allowances and who just plain gets exemptions. And you know the joke about things you shouldn't see made, about legislation, sausage and legislation. This is right where we are right now in terms of this bill. It wouldn't surprise me to see all of industry exempted. I don't think that's going to happen, but it could. I don't know. Let's go on. Just look at some examples here. These numbers are hard to see and all that, but the key thing here is that the first line, the semiconductor people here, the semiconductor industry gets a 5-year free ride under the bill, which in my mind shows the influence of the Portland legislators. And then the next line, I was talking with Charlie about this, who knows everything about power plants that I don't. International Paper in Springfield has a large amount of emissions here, but they're biogenic. They're not considered anthropomorphic. They're biogenic because this is just Dan talking. The wood would have rotted in the forest anyway, right? So what is covered for them is that, which I assume is some sort of fossil fuel they're using to cook things or something. And then we have a steel mill here. And of course, theirs is, they get the free allowances the first year, and then they'll start going down. And then the bottom one is an interesting one. So gas pipelines and pumping natural gas. That's what this is. So when they move natural gas around, they use natural gas to run the pumps. Those are covered as industrial emissions, which is a good thing. Some notes about Lane County local things, like people say, well, does this law cover Seneca? The answer is no, because these are what they're doing are biogenic emissions. They are not burning fossil fuels out there other than a very small amount. So Seneca is not covered. I mentioned Short Mountain previously. Kingsford, who makes the briquettes over there, same thing. They have a lot of emissions, but they're classified mostly as biogenic. And then every other company you can think of locally, there are quite a few on the list. They're all under 25,000 per year. So that's kind of the scene with industrial emissions. Electric utilities. Now, most of this action is about Portland because the rest of the state, in terms of the politics and the history of electricity in Oregon, the rest of the state gets a lot of Bonneville power, and the Portland utilities do not. And so they burn coal, or historically have burned coal or other things to make electricity. And under this measure, this part of the bill got a whole lot of work. It's much better than it was. We know that these electric utilities today, the cheapest form of electricity to buy is from renewables. So they have the easiest route to go. And what the legislation does is it basically gives them 10 years to, in my opinion, to get off of fossil fuels and gives them some support to make that move. The law actually says that if they're still emitting after the 10 years, they have to start buying allowances. But my guess is that they won't have to. Now, outfits like eWeb and Sub and our local power companies are not impacted very much by this law. First, they don't have very many carbon emissions anyway, and the legislature treats them as community-owned utilities and likes to let them run their own operations and doesn't want to tell them what to do. Natural gas. Natural gas has changed a lot in terms of what's proposed to happen. So right now, natural gas, Northwest Natural, for us, they get free allowances only to the extent to cover their low-income residential customers' emissions. And these free allowances that they get, they have to use to help those people pay their bills. They get no other free allowances under the measure. And this is very different than earlier versions of the bill, and where they got 100% free allowances. And I'm sure the gas companies are complaining about this. But there's something really neat that the gas companies are working on that I wanted to mention. So I'm changing the topic to a different bill. But Northwest Natural has outlined that they think they can significantly reduce their emissions by adding more biogenic based natural gas, and that they can inject hydrogen into their gas network, and they can generate the hydrogen from renewable resources. And apparently they can inject a considerable percentage of hydrogen into your gas line, and everything will still work. They can also extract just the hydrogen at the far end. And this is really important because it could lead to alternative ways of powering trucks and ships and airplanes, and using that existing gas pipe infrastructure to ship it. And so I'm hoping that this passes and that the gas company can make their way to a greener future. So now we're transitioning from the factual part of the presentation to Dan's rant. So I think that in the transportation sector, we should be trying to eliminate emissions from gas and oil. We should use any money that comes in from charging the oil companies for carbon allowances to provide money to provide an incentive to people to do something better. I don't think that just raising the price of gasoline changes anything, because no politician can handle the heat from raising gas prices enough to where it would really make everybody mad. Anyway, so this is difficult to do, but that doesn't mean it's not the right thing to do. So under HB 2020, the oil industry gets no free allowances compared to the other sectors, and they're charging the oil companies for it, not directly to people who buy gas and diesel. And all the money goes to the highway fund, because under Oregon's Constitution, that's what has to happen. Although this is argued about some. It's okay.
He could actually make a difference now. I was going to put that to him. Yeah, I see him the same area choir. I read.
Anyway,
Dual citizen, United States of America, state of Israel. That's my jacket.
Now we're taking it out.
Excuse me, follow your jacket. Because I was site. Oh, that's what he meant. Wait, let Dan have his turn now. You need to go now. I didn't have a turn anyway. It's good, I work for 350. Good for you. But let Dan speak. Can you give him this? Oh, I was just sitting right there until I got 86. This is disrupting. These folks. No. I went there and I came over here. I got some stickers and I had to meet my fiance at 8. You, in a hurry, and watch out for your rights. When they leave, you don't have them. It doesn't matter if they're just gone.
anyway, to pick up on this dilemma, in the highway fund, you think about that and you think, isn't it insane to be trying to reduce emissions by providing the highway department with more money to build more highways? But in actuality, it isn't all nuts. They identified, and the state won some national awards over the last 5 years for their work in trying to figure this out. They think they can reduce emissions in Oregon associated with transportation by about 20% by doing things that are eligible for highway funding. And so if you think about a highway or a street, because it does apply to streets, because some of that money comes back to cities and stuff for streets, is that they can spend money on anything within that border of the right-of-way. And that includes bike paths and things that help buses work better and such. And they think that they can improve things a lot in that space. But still, my bias is that we need to work on the vehicles. And of course, in this process, I have become an attorney, and I've been reading all this stuff, right? So I have my opinions about the law like everybody else does. And I think that there's a way to do it, but no one else does. But there's a provision in the Constitution that says you can refund the money and you can give credits. But so far, no one is taking that approach. So this is the constitutional wrench. And That's where we are with this one. Revenues described in the subsection must be used for this and that. Anyway, so this is where we are. With transportation, the oil people get no free allowances, and the money has to be used for this highway fund stuff. We hear, working on some sort of a plan to provide refunds to low-income people who buy gasoline. That's extremely difficult to do, given that we don't know who buys the gasoline and what the definition of low income is, and a bunch of other things. With electricity, that's the easiest part to address. They get 10-year free allowances, but they'll probably be done burning fossil fuels at that time. Natural gas, a little bit of free allowances, but not that much. And then agriculture is exempt, and industrial, well, they're either going to be somewhat exempted, depending on politics, or they'll get free allowances, which will then decrease. So I'm playing teacher. I'm grading the bill, okay? I think that the way that the sophisticated way they're going to handle the electricity generation migration deserves an A. They were very careful not to set up any new bureaucracy to integrate in with the way they already regulate the electric utilities. And the electric utilities are very motivated. They're doing some really innovative things, and their customers are demanding clean electricity. And I think that's all gonna work. For natural gas, I give it a B. I'd give it an A if in the final bill they allow free allowances for them to raise the money to add hydrogen and biogas to their system. I think that's quite likely. Industrial emissions right now, I grade as an A. I'm not sure I'd feel that way after we see what the final bill looks like. And I score the emissions from vehicles, the oil portion of it, as at an F, mostly for political reasons. The TV ads write themselves here. They're gonna raise the price of gas, and it's not gonna lower emissions a bit. So why should you have to pay it? In Washington State, the oil industry spent $30 million defeating their cap and trade proposal, and so I'm very concerned about the politics of this one. And I think it would be an easier sell if we could say, yeah, we're going to raise your taxes, but you can get your money back if you do these things. If you buy an electric car, if you do this, if you do that, you can get your money back. But I don't think that's where it's going to go. Maybe that'll be a part of a future bill. So anyway, this bill does not cover some of the things that are going to be discussed here or shown here by others that deal with sequestration of carbon and forestry and farm practices and all that. This is very much a bill that's just about reducing the use of fossil fuels. I think I give the legislature high marks for the way they've taken it on, and I know it's hard for them, but they've been very inclusive and they've listened to a lot of good people, and I hope that the final bill it won't be perfect, but I hope it's adequate. So anyway, the last part is just they do need to push over the finish line, and here are a couple of exciting links, which are how to find out who your legislator is and how to drop them an email if you want to send them a note. It doesn't need to be anything more than please pass something. You don't have to be an expert on the legislation, but if you do have some specific point, you can imagine what mine said. You can obviously turn that in. They're done taking testimony for the Joint Carbon Committee that's working on it. So it is, at this point, talking to your own representative and senator. So anyway, that's the show about 2020.
Before you take this off,
Ask your question.
do you want to take questions now, or should we wait until all the presenters have gone? Okay, go ahead.
I'm good.
But will you, if you would like, folks, you can take pictures of any of these things. So if you take a picture of this, it will tell you how you can find who your rep and senator are, et cetera.
Yeah, how you doing?
Yes, indeed. Hydrogen is really beautiful because when you burn it, it turns into water vapor. The problem with it is that the main way to get hydrogen is by electrolysis of water, which means that you separate the hydrogen
Yep.
from the oxygen. And water is a very stable substance that takes a lot of energy to separate that. If you're using solar power to do that, it would be a lot more feasible to store in a battery than to make gas, because the gas, you have to waste a lot of energy compressing it and making it liquid to put it in your car. So it's better to put it in a lithium battery or some other type of energy storing device, electricity storing device than that process. I wrote a letter to her about that, and I made a mistake, the same mistake that.
What is your question?
Oh, I don't argue that at all. I just think that anything that results in the natural gas supply being cleaner is a good thing, everything else being equal, and that taking advantage of all those pipes that are out there to move this around is also a good thing. Now, but I'm certainly, there are going to be, who knows what the right options are for any. You may well be right in some cases, or hydrogen may be the right answer for something else. So I don't argue your point.
Okay.
Yeah, my name's Don, and I've been studying this, what you talked about, for a long time. And I drive a hybrid car where I can just tap the brake and it charges the battery up.
Right.
Every major car company is making electric cars. But there's basically no infrastructure to charge electric cars. And I say put charging stations at every rest stop off the freeways. There's built-in rest stops where you can put 2 spaces for charging stations.
Yeah.
Because people aren't going to buy electric cars till there's an infrastructure for them charging their cars.
The legislature is trying to address that through, they have a bucket of money that came from the settlement of Volkswagen scandal with diesel fuel. And there's an effort to take some of that money and use it for that purpose. Yeah, I don't know where that's at, but there are a number of legislators that when we talk to them, they bring that up as something that they want to do. They have done something, but it's out of date, as I understand it, and it pretty much only covers Western Oregon. So they want to fix it up and expand it. There are also incentives, considerable incentives for the electric utilities in this bill. One of the things that they can spend money on that's specifically authorized are electric charging stations. The electric utilities, the private ones, not the local ones, have to ask the Public Utility Commission for permission to do anything. And if it isn't providing electricity to people, the PUC says you can't do it because it's going to cost more, cost people more. But what the legislature is going to tell them, and through this bill, is that tell them to go ahead and put this stuff in, and they can charge people for it in their electric rates. So there's going to be a push from the peers, from the Volkswagen money, and from the legislature for at least the private utilities. Yes, this session.
Was there any talk about adding solar capacity to the actual roadways as part of the Department of Transportation's ability to control the right-of-ways, because at 40 feet high, they could power the state with the simple infrastructure we already have in solar capacities. So, I mean, and for the United States, it's 10,000 square miles, which is easily covered by the right-of-ways of the railways and the highways across this country to power the entire world. So what I don't understand is, why aren't our byways and highways being the source of the solution to power the state by solar, and establish battery systems and so forth, and transfer stations that can do this? Because there's also amperium wire, which is superconductive, and we can use that as superconductive loops to store power. And these technologies have been around for 18 years now in its initial form of BCCO, and then additionally in the now ductile form that NRG makes in Texas and sold to South Korea, and fully installed in 2015 a 3,000 kilometer superconductive loop just for storage capacity. So what I'm trying to say is, why doesn't anybody know about these things, and why isn't the legislature looking into solutions that actually solve problems without using natural gas? Think about how much of how many of those pipelines could be recycled. Just take all that stuff out of the ground and put it away and use it for something new.
Well, as someone who worked in that space, the cost to put pipelines in the ground is extremely high, and to lose the value of that infrastructure is difficult. And a good thing, again, about our gas companies is they've done a great job of cleaning up the pipelines so they don't leak, which makes them conducive to, I didn't say they never leak, but compared to the industry as a whole, they are very good. I don't have a good answer to your question. I didn't cover all the things that the allowance money is to be spent for in this bill, which includes many things like that. I was more interested in talking about where the money was going to come from, but there is a long list of things that they can use the money from selling allowances for that aren't the ones from the oil, but from people on natural gas and so on. That's the best I can do. Thank you.
And as you can imagine, everything is connected to everything else. And so our forester, Fergus McLean, is going to tell us more about the sequestering and our forests, which we would love to see. Thank you.
Good evening. I'm Fergus McLean, here to introduce Angus Duncan on behalf of the Many Rivers Sierra Club Group. Angus is wrapping up his epic work heading Oregon's pioneering Global Warming Commission for how long now, Angus?
10 long years so far.
10 long years. The apex of Angus' work with the commission was achieved last year with publication of the Forest Carbon Accounting Project. These results have transformed our basic understanding of the magnitude of our forest capacity to absorb CO2 from the atmosphere. The reverberations of this new understanding are only beginning to filter through academia and government. They demand a fundamental rethinking of our human connection with Oregon's mighty forests and the impact of that connection on the viability of the planet's biosphere. Another historical development in Oregon forestry came in 2017 when Oregon's top elected officials agreed to the demands of the people of Oregon that the Elliott State Forest remain in public ownership. 350 Eugene. The convergence of these two historic events set the stage for the State Land Board's 2019 year-end deadline for a plan from the Department of State Lands to transform the Elliott into a research institution in collaboration with Oregon State University. But the Land Board has a problem, which is not clear that they recognize yet. They have directed DSL to write the Elliott's Habitat Conservation Plan, the Timber Harvest Plan that U.S. Fish and Wildlife must approve under the Endangered Species Act, before starting work on creating Elliott carbon reserves. It's a frustrating situation that the Elliott, with some of the richest carbon reserves on the planet, cannot fully capitalize on those carbon values because most are already set aside as marbled murrelet reserves and so are ineligible to be monetized in the form of carbon credits. Where we're hoping that Angus can come into the picture is in his proven ability to lead the kind of needed renegotiation of protections for murrelets, which maximizes the creation of the most generous Elliott carbon reserves possible, thereby making a genuine independent research institution in the Elliott feasible by monetizing older, more carbon-dense stands whose value would remain off limits under OSU's primarily timber-oriented strategy. This synthesis of carbon reserves with murrelet reserves cannot be done after the fact. It must be included in the initial shaping of the Habitat Conservation Plan, which is already underway. And it will require some tough, in-depth negotiations between DSL and U.S. Fish and Wildlife. So what you can do to help is to emphasize to DSL Director Vicki Walker, our legislators, and the Land Board that the study of carbon needs to be at the core of research in the Elliott, and that we need the deep understanding of forest carbon flux and the negotiating skills of Angus Duncan on the Elliott Habitat Conservation Plan Advisory Committee. So please join me in welcoming Angus Duncan.
You'll just have to give me a minute here to try to get my presentation organized. I'm sure many of you can remember when we did this with overhead projectors, right, and the big square things, and you could only get it in wrong twice, and the third time it had to be right. Those were only three choices. Those were the good old days. Okay, let's see. All right. Well, good evening. Thank you for inviting me down here. Are there many actual members of the Unitarian congregation in the audience? There are. Okay, so where do the second bases sit? In case I decide to move to Eugene. Right over there, okay? Good, yes. I sing in the Unitarian choir, First Unitarian up in Portland. Good. I just wanted to develop sort of a friendly rapport right at the outset, in case I say things that you're not happy with, and that's certainly possible. Well, sing us a song. All right. Shall I sing my presentation? No, I don't think you want that. Second base. Okay. So, I have been working on climate issues actually for the better part of about 30 years when shortly after I joined the Northwest Power Planning Council, it's appointed by the governor, one of the pioneer governors way back, and the Northwest Power Planning Council is the electricity planning entity for the 4 Northwest states. And this was right after the very first the IPCC International Climate Change panel issued its first report. And so a staff member and I decided we would do this presentation to the other 7 members, from the 4 Northwest states of the council. And so we worked diligently, and we developed as sophisticated a presentation on climate change as you could back in 1990 or so, and finished and looked at each other. We're pretty proud of ourselves, and then turned around and I saw 7 of the blankest stares from the other 7 council members that I saw, then or thereafter. They hadn't a clue what we were talking about. Well, this was 1990. It was a long time ago. And it has been an effort just to get climate change on both people's minds and the public agenda ever since. In 2003, working with some colleagues in the state of Washington and the state of California, we were able to put together something called, the West Coast Governors, Climate Change Agreement, something like that. Got the 3 West Coast governors to all stand up on the same platform at the same time, 2003, and say, this is important. We need to deal with it. We don't understand all of the metes and bounds of it, but we do know that it's a serious threat to life as we know it in our 3 states. That was Governor Kulongoski. And thereafter, Governor Kulongoski put together something called his advisory group on global warming. And we developed a proposal, a set of recommendations that we handed to him in 2004 that included, among other things, what are now and have been for the better part of 12 years, the state's greenhouse gas reduction goals. We recommended that by 2010, we arrest that upward creep of emissions and bend the line back downwards. And in fact, we hit that goal. We recommended that by 2020, we be at least 10% below 1990 levels. It's 2019, and we're not going to hit that second goal. And the third goal we recommended was by 2050, we have to be at least 75% below 1990 levels. We didn't know 75, 85, 80. We knew we had to have it way down, and that it would take really upending pretty much every understanding we had about fossil fuels, about energy generally, and about a lot of other aspects of life in our region, including agriculture and forests. So fast forward to, I'm going to fast forward to the summer of 2018. This is August of last summer, and that's what the Pacific Northwest looked like on August 14th of last year. There was smoke from British Columbia down to Northern California, east to Idaho and Montana. There wasn't much of the Pacific Northwest that wasn't covered with, affected by smoke. That was a repeat of the prior summer, 2017, which was equally oppressive. And when it's that smoky, it's not just a matter of, say, visibility when you're driving down the highway. It's a matter of respiratory diseases, particularly child asthma. It's a matter of economic impacts. The smoke last summer caused the Oregon Shakespearean Festival in Ashland to either shut down or move a dozen or 15 of its outdoor performances, and ultimately lose several $1 million out of a budget that's a really thin budget anyway. Overall, the state of Oregon lost about $50 million in projected tourism revenue that didn't materialize because of the smoke. I have a place over in Sisters, Oregon. The biggest event in Sisters, Oregon every summer is the Folk Festival. In 2017, the Folk Festival shut down completely. We didn't have a single performance. We couldn't have people come in when you couldn't see across the street because of the smoke. A year earlier in 2015, we didn't have the smoke and the forest fire issues in 2015, but what we did have, was a winter wet season, precipitation season, where almost all the precipitation fell as rain and almost none of it fell as snow. And as a consequence, we had almost no snowpack. We had near empty reservoirs. The reservoir that in the Santiam River that feeds the city of Salem, because the water was so low, it accumulated an algae contamination, and we couldn't supply water to the city of Salem, for a week or a week and a half. The ski resorts in the Cascades either shut down or had shortened seasons. Again, a major economic impact, and not just to the ski resorts, but to all of the restaurants and hotels and all of the businesses that rely on that as a part of that local economy. So we've had some real serious hits. This is more now than polar bears not being able to find an ice floe to float on. And the report that my commission did last summer to submit to the legislature focused particularly on the message that all of those predictions of what greenhouse gases would do to Oregon's climate, all those future conditions that nobody really believed would occur because life was going on as usual. Well, the first balloon payment on that debt hit in 2015, the second one in 2017, the third one in 2018, and we can pretty much reasonably expect, bigger and bigger balloon payments on that outstanding debt for the foreseeable future. And the real issue is, can we make those payments level off? Can we reduce emissions enough that we stabilize the parts per million of greenhouse gases in the atmosphere so that as bad as circumstances are going to be getting, that they won't get so bad that they make a good part of the planet uninhabitable. All right, that's the good news. Moving right along. So one of the things this is kind of where we started back in the commission was impaneled in 2009. We spent 2010 developing our first report to the legislature and issued it in 2011. We called it a roadmap to 2020. We said, here are the things that we have to do, and the scale at which we have to do them if we're going to hit that 2020 target. We knew we could hit the 2010. We already had. We gave them a long list of things that we had to do to hit 2020. Most of those things had to do, as you saw with the pie chart earlier, had to do with electric utilities, gas utilities, and transportation. Right? Why? Because that's where the emissions were. And we knew the emissions were large there. We were actually measuring them as early as that so that we could track what the state's emissions were year by year. We actually looked at 6 different areas. So utilities, transportation, industry, ag, forestry, and something that we called stuff, right? It's basically consumption. The stuff that we buy, we use it, we put it in a landfill. There's a greenhouse gas penalty that gets paid all the way along that way. So we looked at all 6 of those areas. We could come up with data and recommendations in 5 of them. The one we couldn't come up with any recommendations for was forests. We didn't have the data. What we basically knew, and this was informed judgment, it was not evidence driven, we knew that the west side public forests, including the Elliott, were very carbon dense, and they were acquiring net carbon. We knew that every year more carbon would be captured and held by that forest than released by it. And we'll talk about how these carbon flows occur within a forest. But when you added it all up at the end of the year, you had more carbon in west side forests than you started out with at the beginning of the year. Public forests. East side public forests wasn't as clear. Didn't look like we were acquiring net carbon on the east side, and we knew we had a lot of forest health issues, especially accumulation of fuel that was going to feed into the forest fires that we knew were headed in our direction. We said, you gotta figure out how to improve the health of those east side forests, and then we have to focus on carbon acquisition. And third, we said, if we're going to do all of these things in the public forest, and we still are going to be taking product out of the forest, that's going to have to come from the private forest. So, west side public forest accrue carbon, east side public forest, restore health and then accrue carbon. Private woodlot and industrial forests, that's where the product comes from. That was as close as we could get in 2011. But we also said, we think this is a bigger deal than we're able to say in 2011. So between now and the next time we look at it, we are going to work with the Forest Service and the Board of Forestry to come up with better data so that we can talk, with some credibility about forest carbon. 2016, we talked to the Forest Service. They've been doing data accumulation and analysis. We thought we could take a first crack at it. So we set up an advisory task force. We relied very heavily on what the Forest Service calls FIA data, Forest Inventory and Analysis data, where they had actually focused particularly on California and Oregon forests to try to actually measure how much carbon was in the forest, where it was within the forest, and were we adding to it or subtracting from it. And then we also had the OSU School of Forestry and the scientists there who were doing similar kinds of work. They were relying also on the FIA data, but they were augmenting it and digging down deeper into it. And so I'm going to go over a little bit of that and then talk about the findings and then finally, where I see the forest carbon issue heading, not in House Bill 2020, as it turns out, but subsequently. So here's what the FIA data could give us. They could give us how much carbon was in different forests, sorted as you see up there, by different forest land owners, so that we could look at public and private forest owners and see, who's got what forests with what carbon and where we are gaining and where we are losing. And then we would look, pool by pool within the forest. And this is an important concept to understand. The carbon in the forest is not static. In fact, I'm just going to jump ahead. There it is, right there. Ignore the NEPs and NECBs. I learn what those things mean one day and I forget them the next. But essentially, what this is saying is that the live trees and shrubs in the forest acquire carbon out of the atmosphere. We all know that, right? Photosynthesis, grab carbon, release oxygen. But once that carbon is in the live trees and shrubs, then it starts to move around within the forest. So when a tree dies from natural causes or from fire, which is at least half of the time a natural cause, then you have a dead tree like that one over there. But it's still got a lot of carbon in that snag, even though the branches in the top are all gone down on the forest floor. Some of that forest floor branches, show up as what's called woody detritus there. So that's a lot of stuff down on the floor. Some of it is growing on the floor. Some of it is simply littered on the floor. And as it decomposes, as the wood decomposes, some of that carbon goes back up into the air, but some of it goes down into the soil. And so we actually have a lot of forest carbon in the soil as well. The two biggest pools within the forest are live trees and shrubs, as you see, and soil. Live trees and shrubs, that carbon tends to move around a fair bit. It gains, it loses. The soil carbon doesn't move around very much. So that's kind of slowly accreting or slowly being lost, but it's very stable. Everything else moves around a lot. We can lose carbon also by harvesting trees out of the forest. And there are losses, pretty much at every stage, from cutting the tree down and limbing it and topping it and putting it on a truck and sending it to the mill where you process it, and so at each one of those steps, and then eventually you build everything from houses to toilet paper with it, and some of the carbon goes back up into the atmosphere relatively quickly, paper towels. Some of it can stay sequestered in wood products for an extended period of time, like in a house. Some of it, gets dumped into a landfill, and if it's a good landfill and it's buried, it can hold its carbon in that landfill for a long time too. But eventually, all of this stuff keeps moving around. So everything that's growing in the forest, one way or another, will ultimately end up back in the atmosphere. It's just a matter of what path it takes and how long it takes. So that's important to understand. Key takeaways from the work that we did with ODF and with the U.S. Forest Service and our advisory committee. The most important data points here are we've got a lot of carbon in Oregon forests, a huge amount. 3 billion tons of carbon. Convert that to carbon dioxide equivalent, that's about 11 billion tons of carbon dioxide equivalent. And in order for you to try to get a sense for how much that is, remember that our annual emissions from all sources in Oregon equal a little over 60 million tons. So 60 million tons annual emissions from everything else in Oregon versus 11 billion tons in the forest right now. And we think that we are on net acquiring somewhere between 23 and 63 million tons of carbon a year in Oregon forests. I told you in 2010-11 we said we think those west side forests are acquiring carbon. Well, they are, and a lot of it. Most of that acquisition is coming in those west side forests. 23 to 63, it's pretty widespread. But that just is an example of why we need better data and analysis. But assume for the sake of argument it's somewhere in the middle there, 30 to 40 million tons net acquired. That is net of all the harvest, it's net of all the mortality in the forest and all of the losses. So it's about 88 million tons gross. Subtract the losses, and you end up with about 30 to 40 million tons a year acquired in Oregon's forests. Most of that carbon is in federal forests. As you see, about 73, almost 3/4 of the carbon's in federal forests. About 1/4 of the carbon is in private, either woodlots or industrial forests. And all of our categories, all of those different colors that you saw, all of those are, at least right now, acquiring net carbon, but almost all of that is coming into federal forests, almost 80% of it. So 60% of the acreage in Oregon is federal forests, but 80% of the carbon being acquired is being acquired by the federal forests. 30% of the carbon is in private forests, or private forest acreage. 36% of our acreage is private forests, but only 4% of the acquisition every year is coming in private forests. Well, that makes sense because those are the ones that are being harvested much more heavily than the public forests. But it still says, the good thing it says is we're acquiring carbon in all of our forests, and the more distressing thing is, well, why are we only acquiring 4% in private industrial woodlands? And we want to ask those kinds of questions. Nationally, forest carbon is, we are acquiring net carbon in U.S. forests overall, but we are losing net carbon in global forests overall. So that means that where we can acquire carbon in U.S. forests, we really should be leveraging that as much as possible. And leveraging it where we are most likely to acquire carbon. The forests in Oregon and Washington and up into Canada and southern Alaska are as carbon rich and as carbon dense as all of those tropical jungle rainforests that we all rightly are concerned about losing, because we're losing all of the carbon that was sequestered in those rainforests. Well, if we lose our forests in Oregon, Washington, and Alaska, we're losing a comparable amount of carbon per acre. That's how dense and important our forests are. And as you can see, this is a set of national forests in the Northwest states. By far the largest concentration is in the Tongass in Alaska. It's a huge forest. But Oregon, so Tongass has about 11 million tons of, 11 million acres of carbon dense forests. But Oregon has more than 50% of that. It's got 6 million acres of carbon dense forests. That is a significant amount of forest carbon globally. When people say, oh, Oregon, we're a small state, why should we break our necks to solve the carbon problem? Well, you can argue that in a lot of different places, but it is not remotely arguable here. This is a lot of carbon. These forests are critical globally. So we talked about the pools, the 5 pools in the forest, to which we have to add another pool, and that is the forest wood products pool. When you take wood out of the forest, you take a tree out of the forest, you mill it into a product. I already told you there are losses in carbon all along the way, but ultimately you get a durable product or a non-durable product. If it's a non-durable product like paper towels, we assume it decomposes and those emissions return to the atmosphere almost immediately. If it's a house, wood frame house, there are a number of tons that are locked up in that house for an extended period of time. Goes into a landfill, as I said, they're locked up for an extended period of time too. We need to understand how much is lost and how much is sequestered at each step in that wood products pool, because that's also a highly dynamic pool. And that's something the Forest Service data don't tell us. They are very good at giving us data for where the carbon is in national forests, but they can tell us how much is lost by removing trees from the forest, but they can't tell us what happens to that carbon once it leaves the forest. So we have argued in our report and asked the Oregon Department of Forestry and the legislature to focus particularly on developing reliable additional data that will tell us more about what happens to that wood products pool. What data we have so far is not encouraging. It really suggests that when you cut a tree in the forest, by the time it ends up in either a durable or non-durable wood product, you've probably lost somewhere between 70 and 80% of the carbon. 70 to 80% of that carbon is decomposing relatively rapidly and going back up into the atmosphere, and you're only durably sequestering somewhere between 15 and 25% of it. And if that's the case, and we can establish that, then that says that there is a real issue with how our forests either contribute positively or negatively to our emissions.
How does that happen if 80% gets lost?
It gets lost. Well, so start out, as I think I just did, you start out by limbing it and topping it in the forest. So now you've lost the limbs, you've lost the top, you've left a stump to decompose, you've left the roots to decompose. That's a significant chunk, maybe 15 to 20% of the total carbon in that tree right there. Then you... Yes, but to the extent it's decomposing in the process, it's releasing carbon dioxide back into the atmosphere. That is chemically what's happening. So, and then you also lose it when you get it to the mill and you have to mill it into 2x4s or whatever, and you have wastage there, and you either burn it right there or you chip it and you put it on flower gardens where again it decomposes and releases its atmosphere. And sort of each step of the way you're losing more carbon out of what was a tree. If you'd left that tree in place, you'd have left all of the carbon in place. If you take it out, you cut it up, you use it, you'll still preserve some of that carbon, you'll sequester some of the carbon, but not even remotely what you had sequestered if you'd left the tree in the forest. So it doesn't mean we won't cut trees, doesn't mean we won't harvest, does mean it's important that we understand what the carbon accounting consequences are of everything that we do in a forest. Okay? So we know we need better measurement, we need better analysis methodologies. We know that there are significant opportunities to substantially increase our forest carbon stores, and our report recommends that we look at a number of those. The simplest one is simply to leave the trees in place longer. Increasingly, industrial forest lands are reducing their rotation periods. You know, they used to cut when the trees reach an 80 or 90 year maturity. And now increasingly they're shortening that rotation down to 50 and 45, and in some cases even 35 years. So you're moving that carbon out of the forest faster every time you cut a smaller tree, and you're not replacing it nearly as fast. It's fast out and it's slow back in. So we need to be looking at our harvest practices. There are opportunities to reforest parts of especially Western Oregon that used to be forested and ended up being cleared for agricultural or other reasons. There are a number of opportunities to do that. We took a look at forest wildfire, and it's a really complicated subject. It's so complicated that I'm going to spare you staying here till midnight while I go through every twist and turn of it. But if you have some questions, I'm happy to try to take those at the end. But I will just say this, that the common assumption that when you have a big wildfire, you lose tons of carbon, therefore we have to suppress fire, that is not necessarily the case. When you actually go out and measure it, it turns out that most fires are not losing significant amounts of carbon. Some, but not huge amounts. And the trade-off there is that fire historically has been an essential part of forest ecology. We've suppressed it for several decades. Now we're trying to reintroduce it, and the trick is to reintroduce it at a level that is sufficient to help restore the health of the forest, but not at a level that significantly increases greenhouse gas emissions. Climate change may or may not allow us to do that. You know, as we've seen from the fires in California, it's a hard thing to manage, but that at least is where we will be starting. And then finally, as I said, forest practices that remove wood from the forest, whether it's through harvest, whether it's through forest health treatments that remove, small diameter trees to try to manage for fires. Every time you take a piece of fiber out of the forest, you reduce the carbon in that forest. Just simple math. And the question is, how do you do that in ways that conserve as much carbon and leave as much carbon sequestered in the forest as possible while you're managing for other losses? And I am going to spare you this one because the type is so small, I can't read it. But basically it says what I said earlier, that there are ways that we can increase the carbon sequestered in the forest and hold it for longer periods of time. And this is kind of a basic, not very well understood part of the whole carbon dynamic. As you heard with House Bill 2020, that's entirely focused on reducing emissions that occur when we burn fossil fuels. Forest carbon practices are kind of the reverse. They have to be focused on how we keep emissions from releasing out of the forest, and we try to acquire more in the carbon and hold it in the forest than we lose. So one of these tries to keep emissions from going into the atmosphere. The other tries to increase carbon being fixed and taken out of the atmosphere. And it seems like it's a hard thing to keep both of those two ideas in your head. But from the perspective of the atmosphere, the whole objective is fewer parts per million of carbon in the atmosphere. Whether you achieve that by not sending as much out of a coal plant or by pulling more into a tree, doesn't matter. The effect in the atmosphere is exactly the same. And so that says we need to be thinking about how we leverage our forests into this equation that House Bill 2020 is beginning to address on the other side of the equation. And this is just a schematic that suggests a way to do this. So that orange line is the fossil fuel emissions that need to be reduced, And we just sort of drawn a line that says, we keep reducing those between now and 2050, and we get down to someplace on the right-hand side of this where, they are a de minimis amount of emissions. If at the same time we are maintaining or even increasing a little bit the carbon that's captured in the forest and held in the forest, we have the opportunity to adopt a new carbon goal for the state, and that would be carbon neutrality, which we think we could achieve somewhere in the mid-2030s. Absolute carbon neutrality. And that's, to me, that would be a truly inspiring goal, not just for us, but for everybody who's out there trying to make this work. But even more exciting than that is what happens after you achieve carbon neutrality, and that is you become carbon negative. You're taking more out of the atmosphere than you're putting in, and now you've gone from being a part of the problem to being a part of the solution. And not every country, not every state will have the opportunity to do this. But those who do have that opportunity, and Oregon is very much one of those, it's not just an opportunity, it is also an obligation. We are stewards of those forests, and we have a responsibility to the rest of the planet to make them function as carbon efficiently as possible. House Bill 2020, at this point, will only be taking forests into account by saying that if there are forests like the Elia, but more likely like some of the private industrial forests, and they can commit to increasing the capture and the duration of carbon in their forests, that they can offer those as offsets to people who would otherwise have to buy allowances in order to emit. So a utility, an oil company, could buy some offsets from a private industrial woodland owner in order to help make hit his target for emissions reduction. Offsets and allowances, essentially, they serve the same purpose within House Bill 2020. They add to the flexibility for folks who have to reduce emissions. If they have a bad year where they have a hard time reducing emissions, they can buy allowances or they can buy offsets and then try to get back on the path the next year or the year after. But we deliberately put a limit of no more than 8% of your compliance can be met by using offsets. We don't want people using offsets as a way of continuing business as usual. We want them to use offsets as a flexibility, a liquidity tool. But in the end, we want them to be reducing their absolute emissions. And so we expect that 8% cap on offsets will probably drop down to 6 and 4 and eventually down to 0. And then you got to ask yourself, well, then what do we do about the forests and their contribution? And I hope to have a hearing on that with my commission this summer. But I think what we end up having to contemplate is that an industrial woodland is really no different from an industrial cement plant. If a cement plant is emitting greenhouse gases and we want it to do less, we cap its emissions and we lower the cap. If an industrial woodland, is not keeping enough carbon sequestered in the woodland, then maybe we have to give it a reverse cap. Maybe we have to give it a target that's higher each year and say, you have to increase your carbon acquisition and you have to hold it for this period of time. And we can do that either with incentives, as under House Bill 2020, or we can do it with regulation, or we can do it with some combination of the two. But as you see, there's so much carbon at stake in Oregon forests that's an issue we will have to come to grips with, but not till we pass House Bill 2020. Thank you very much.
Okay. If you have questions, they need to be questions. Okay? All right.
I'm not going to answer
Very,
any
very
statements
brief.
or any rants.
Yeah.
Only I get to make rants up here.
Angus, do you expect House Bill 2020 to be referred to the voters?
Yes.
And if so, how should that be engineered so that the rank and file voter has enough information to actually approve it?
Well, I can tell you, because I was on the steering committee for the state of Washington's, initiative last year, 1631. We started in Washington, and we will start in Oregon with a significant majority of voters saying, we think climate change is real, we think we're responsible, we think the effects are serious and consequential, and we've got to do something meaningful about it. Amen. We did exit polling in Washington. So voters who had just come out of the polls voting against the initiative, we asked them the same questions, and the same number, 65 to 35, said, climate change, real, serious, it's us, we got to do something meaningful about it, just not this one. It is a quirk of the way we are wired as human beings that somehow we can rationalize bad choices by saying, well, it wasn't a perfect choice, so I'm going to vote against it and keep voting against it until they give me a perfect choice. As you heard from the kind of sausage making that legislating is, there's never going to be a perfect choice. There are always going to be things that someone's not going to like about it. That said, when a bill comes out of the legislature and it's a law and has to be challenged by somebody, that's a much steeper hill for the challenge to climb. And I think we will also have been careful with House Bill 2020 so that it is first a carbon reduction bill and second, it has revenue consequences. 1631 was a really big revenue raiser, and they were doing it by taxing carbon. But people focused on the really big revenue part, and so really big tax part, instead of the carbon. So we're going to try to flip that on its head, make sure that people can see that money's coming back, and that the real focus is on reducing carbon, and then we will fight it out at the polls. But I will tell you, the people I know who are really smart about this, and I used to be one of those in my younger days, but now I rely on people who understand what exactly social media is. And they say they're pretty comfortable defending House Bill 2020 at the polls, as long as we are sufficiently, if we're no worse off in terms of financial disadvantage than 1631 was, we think we can defend it at the polls. Much better to bring something out of the legislature and defend it than bring it to the polls and try to enact it. Okay, question, right?
Yes, question. Do you think that we should consider the fact of population growth? Each new family has to have a new home that takes up wood and cement?
Well, we have to figure consumption. And consumption is basically population times appetite. So, yes, if we can persuade the world to level off its population, and I think that is actually highly probable. The more countries become stable, the lower infant mortality goes down, the smaller the families people tend to have, and that's just a demographic outcome that has been proven over and over again around the world. It won't matter much if every family wants to live the way you and I live here in Oregon. So we're going to have to figure out how to live a lot more carbon efficiently and set a standard that the rest of the world can aspire to without, in the process, blowing the roof off carbon again. And I think it is eminently doable. I will just tell you, we have been working on energy efficiency in the electric utilities now for 30 years, and we have yet to build a new fossil fuel plant to serve loads in the 4 Northwest states. And in fact, we have closed a number and we are continuing to close them. Now, and that's really good. And part of the reason, as somebody earlier said, is that wind and solar are now becoming much more competitive and economic, but they're still relatively small. The single largest resource we have in the Pacific Northwest right now, and don't ask me how we calculate this, but we can, is energy efficiency. It's bigger than coal, it's bigger than gas, it's even bigger than hydroelectric energy. Energy efficiency. It can be done.
Are any of the utilities even promoting energy efficiency?
Yes, pretty much all of them in the Northwest anymore are. Some of them do a better job than others, but to give you an example, there's an organization called ACEEE, operates out of Texas, American Conservation, and then 3 E's. I don't know what they stand for. And every year they do an analysis of which states are doing the best at utility energy efficiency. And I will tell you, every year, it's Oregon, Washington, and 8 states that have power costs that are 2 to 3 times what ours are. And in those states, they're good states, they do good work, but they have high energy prices driving energy efficiency. We have relatively low energy prices. We make up for it with good policy, and it works. Sir.
So has there been any formal measurements of the biological components of the forests other than the trees that are able to sequester carbon? I'm specifically referencing the 750,000 red salamanders per square mile in most forests that sequester between 4 and 6 ounces of forest detritus every year, and that the reversal of farmland to forest could also move the needle in that one biological component alone.
So you've just poked a giant salamander hole in our database. Thanks a lot. The answer is no. We have just looked at the flora part of the carbon equation in forests. There's a significant fauna equation as well, and we haven't looked at that. But what we do know is if we have healthier, denser forests, they are also going to be better habitat for salamanders and an awful lot of other carbon-intensive life forms.
So much.
Okay?
Thank you. All right. And for the other part of this program, we have Sandra Clark. Please come. And this is another huge area that we need to be working on. Yes?
Hi, everyone. Thank you for hanging in there. My name is Sandra Clark, and I will definitely make this short. I do want to thank you, Sue, for inviting us here. And I also want to say thank you to Angus for saying carbon neutrality by 2030 and helping us to believe that. You don't hear that very often. So that is a beautiful message. So I've been asked just to update on the Jordan Cove Energy Project. The slides that I have behind me don't match what I'm going to say. They're just there to show you that a large part of what's happening is through grassroots activism. And so hopefully in these slides back here, you'll see pictures of what I'm talking about, and you'll see evidence of the grassroots. So, and then as I look around, so many people here already know this information, so I'm going to go kind of fast over this part of it. It's an energy project that has 4 parts. It's the extraction, which is largely fracking, hydraulic fracking from the interior western United States and Canada. It's a pipeline that'll go about 330 odd miles through public, private, and tribal lands, 400 plus waterways, including the Klamath, the Umpqua, the Coquille, and the Rogue Rivers. The project would put a compressor station in Malin, a small little town, which would connect this pipeline to the Ruby pipeline to bring that gas. And then also an export terminal in Coos Bay, which we've heard a lot about our emissions targets in Oregon, right? It would just blow those completely out of the water. It'd be a huge polluter. And the purpose would be to cool down that gas into liquid so that we could ship it over to Asia, where there's a market, some people say. And then it would also include tanker ships, which are the largest ships in the world, 3 football fields long, which would be going in and out of Coos Bay, shutting down the bay as it did that. And so just to recap, it's a foreign company, Pembina, out of Canada, that wants to claim eminent domain to ship fracked gas to Asia through an earthquake and tsunami zone. Yeah, what's to love? And it's called the zombie pipeline. Anybody know why? It won't die. It's already been denied twice at the federal level. And Trump, within 1 week of his inauguration, named it and said it was back on, and it is right now. So just to update really quickly, yeah, we'll talk about this in just a second. We are a part, 350 Eugene, and other people here are part of a coalition, Road Climate. It's a state coalition that has environmentalists, of course, but also landowners, First Nations, other social justice groups. It's a very strong coalition. And we are in the permitting phase. We've been in the permitting phase since 2005, believe it or not. And I find the permitting phase not that sexy, honestly. And we get small wins, but we celebrate those wins. And so we have, despite Pembina having a huge media blast, just spending millions of dollars on TV ads and flyers, we are having some small wins, and this is what the update is. So here's a few of our wins. One, the Jackson County commissioners were the first county commission that came out against it. So that was cool. We were very happy about that. In Douglas and in Coos County in the last couple months, judges have revoked previously granted extensions to Pembina, and so there's 7 miles of the pipeline in Douglas County that is unpermitted. Right, it cannot move right now, and the same in Coos County. Yeah. And then I think the biggest message for tonight is that grassroots activism does work. That's what these pictures over here are about. Citizens are turning out, and largely due to some efforts of people here in this room. So the permits. The DEQ and the Army Corps of Engineers had a water quality permitting phase open earlier this year. 43,000 plus online comments that were submitted. There's so many comments that they have to push back their deadline because they are trying to go through them. And but they do have a hard deadline of next September of making a decision about water quality. The same thing is true at the at the DSL for the removal fill commenting period that just closed. Over 50,000 online comments, 36,000 of which were through the Sierra Club. So our Sierra Club allies right here. Yeah. But also more than 3,000 comments in face-to-face hearings that were held around the state, mostly in Southern Oregon, where they're mostly impacted. And they have had so many comments that they've pushed back their deadline from this month to September as well. And we consider that a win as well. Anything that pushes back is a win. And then lastly, FERC, the Federal Energy Regulatory Commission, will be opening a commenting period for their draft environmental impact statement sometime soon. It was supposed to be open already, it hasn't, but sooner or later that will happen. And so that's something that we will be motivating and getting people to be making an opinion about that as well. So what can you do? So one, on March 28th is our lobby day. We will be carpooling from here in Eugene and then going up to Salem. So starting at 10 o'clock, they'll feed us breakfast, they'll teach us how to lobby, they'll feed us lunch, they'll set up some meetings with our legislators, and you can go talk to them. And we will be also planning some creative disruption outside as well. So that's always really fun. Yeah. And that's what makes permitting kind of more sexy, is having some of that, yeah, and the camaraderie around that. You can also join the Oregon Frack Gas Resistance team that 350 has. So we work on this, and we work on other issues that are coming up as well. And so we meet the third Thursdays at 6:30. And then, but not this month. So a few of you, we're not going to meet this month. Just because there's nothing really happening. It's all been pushed back. And so we'll kind of save our energy for something else. So that's the update. I would end with a plea. Yeah, go ahead.
Sunday at PILT, they had a talk about the Jordan Cove pipeline, and they had an economic guy speak, and he said that the whole project is unviable economically.
Yes.
Really good.
Yes, it seems to be unviable economically, and that's actually the reason that it was denied at FERC. When it was denied at the federal level is because they could not show that they had contracts with people in Asia and a place to send it. So that was the reason. It wasn't any environmental reason that we kind of like to think it would be. It was an economic reason. So that's good to hear.
There was more than just that, though. They look at a 35-year project, and there's no room for expansion. It closes the harbor too much.
Right. Good. I'm glad to hear it.
Anyone who has their pill pamphlet can go in and see what his name was and probably get stuff on it.
Perfect.
Ed Whitelaw.
Ed Whitelaw?
Whitelaw. Ed Whitelaw. How do you spell it? W-H-I-T-E-L-A-W.
Whitelaw. All right, and that just kind of reminds me that I'm not the expert in the room. Any other information about this? Yeah.
We only have 4 state representatives who have come out vocally against this project. One of them is Senator Manning.
Yeah.
We should thank him, and we should put a whole hell of a lot of pressure on the rest of them to come out against this project.
Yes.
Dembro, Golden,
Blumenauer.
and Marsh.
Marsh.
3 senators and 1 representative, and the rest of them say nothing. So put pressure on them.
And that is actually the goal of the lobby day, is to encourage our legislators to go public against this. It's the 28th of March. Yeah, and we will be carpooling. Yes.
We have a compatriot in Portland named Dan Kaufman. I'm a musician. There are a bunch of us musicians around in this part of Oregon that are putting a concert together here on April 12th. Dan will be singing and playing with his band. And it's all protest songs, all of the 60s and 70s about the pipeline.
Wow. Okay. Will you say it again? So we will advertise that.
Thank you.
Yeah. What date again?
April 12th. Where? Right here.
Bravo. Okay.
We need questions. Questions.
One more, Senator. One more comment. I just want to thank you and all the groups that because Vicki Walker got overwhelmed up with DSL.
Right.
They had to extend the period
Exactly.
of time to receive comments by almost 2 months to accommodate their staff that hasn't been able to.
They postponed till September, 6 months.
Thank you so much.
Yeah.
And that terminal that you show up there, the drawing, that's snowy plover habitat, endangered species, and they are not doing surveys for snowy plovers.
Yeah, I've been reading about Chernobyl. And could you say something about a possibility of an explosion in one of these plants? It could happen, right?
It could happen. Yes. Yeah. Very explosive. And these they say that these tankers are as or more explosive than an oil tanker, right? So the tankers are also very explosive. Yeah, and then going through our forest lands as well. And we just heard wonderful information about our forest lands. Okay, so I would just end with just a plea. So Sue, I think there's one more.
You said there was a bus going from Eugene.
There's carpooling at this point, but we may, if we get enough interest, we may get a bus as well. Yeah.
Where's the carpool meet at?
So we will be meeting at the Methodist Church, First United Methodist Church, right? And probably 8:30ish, because we want to be up there by 1376 Olive. Thank you.
Okay.
All right, so I would just end this with my plea, whether I'm talking about Jordan Cove or any other thing. If you have any interest in any related thing that we've been talking about tonight, or food security, or anything related to the climate, now is the time to step up. We need you. We need your skill set. There's a place for you in this movement. And that's always a message I want to give you. And as Timothy Snyder says, be as courageous as you can. Thank you.
I just want to thank all these courageous people in this audience who have already done incredible things. But as you can see, if we can join together, we'll do it. And we've got some incredible interesting ideas coming out. We want them all. We don't need to sit on anything. We're going to have to do everything to make this work. And thank you for coming. And I also want to thank Lon Otterby, who is one of the most, he brings us together better than anybody I have ever seen. If I'm going to do something, he sends me this list of organizations that I can call or get involved. And so it's just another way to make it work. And don't go away, because I want you to meet some people that are almost in back of you for a very special reason. Thank you all for coming. Thank you, thank you.